All right, we are continuing today with the question that we started last week. Right, this is the question on process costing, and I still do believe it's in our syllabus. Right? I still haven't gotten a confirmation. I think I was saying particularly for the guys on MAC 761. I can't remember if I got a confirmation if it's on the syllabus, but it's relatively short. Right, we are gonna finish with it today. So I think I'm gonna start off by making a slight correction on what we did last time. And it's good because I've put this on record so that the guys that couldn't attend, if they watch today's session, they can be able to make that slight correction there. Actually, it's two corrections which I saw while I was going over what we did last time. All right, so the first correction, maybe before we get there, I'm just going to detail what we do. So I was saying the first thing for us to do when you're tackling a question like this, like a question like this on process costing, if you're like me and you can't quickly remember the format, you can simply flip through. Your 2601 study guide. It's on study guide number 1. Then you can see the format for that. And then I think maybe your textbook also should have that, but I haven't opened that textbook in a while. And I do remember Colin Drury doesn't have that format. They actually use a different format. I think for myself, the time when I was in school, we were using the format that's in Colin Drury because it was some British standard that we're dealing with them. So once you have that, then you want to carefully consider what the wastage point is, or where the wastage point occurs. So this is where it occurs at the point of 80%, which obviously results in what normal loss? It's a 5% normal loss. So you want to carefully take that into consideration. Why is that important? This is important. This 80% is important because it gives us direction in terms of the opening work in progress and closing work in progress, in terms of whether or not it's included, right? Whether or not it's included in this current month's wastage point. So the rule book on that is you look at the percentage here. Let's start with the opening work in progress. You look at the percentage. The percentage here is 70%. So which means at the beginning of the month, these what you call them? These, what are we doing here? We are making tomatoes, right? So this work in progress was 70% to completion, right? So it means we're on 70% and our wastage occurs where at 80%. So which means at the beginning of the month, this current inventory had not gone through the wastage point because it's on 70%. The wastage point is on 80%. So which means when we are calculating the normal loss 5%, we take that into consideration, that the opening work in progress has to be included. Then you also look at the closing work in progress. Here, what applies there is pretty much opposite to what we described on the opening work in progress. Here, we are saying this is at 90% completion. So the question is, did it go through the 80% during this current month? So in our instance, it did go through the 80%. So hence, the closing work in progress as well as the opening work in progress need to be included in our calculation of the normal loss. All right. So I think that's fair so far on that. That's fairly easier to understand. And then this is what we believe. So I remember we made a couple of adjustments there. I tried to take out the adjustments there, to remove the adjustments so that we can work them out. Let's see. Because now I can't remember what was in the adjustment and what wasn't in the adjustment. All right. So this is what we did so far. So we had 1,000 liters that was opening work in progress, and then 5,000 liters on what was put in during the current period. So we actually had a total of, sorry, we don't need this again. So we actually had a total of 6,000 that went in, right? So because we are using the first in, first out, so the one other thing that you might want to check in the question is, are we using the weighted average method or the first in, first out? So we will quickly also go through both again. I think we have better time today. So here we started off with our with the FIFO, the first in, first out method. So in that method in particular, we break it down. We want to break it down and distinguish between opening work in progress and what was currently put in into the production, right? And then you first of all want to fill in. This is pretty obvious. This one I'm gonna show you where we get it. This 1,000 there. We are gonna get where we got that, but you also want to fill in the completed units or the completed liters, one that is the completed and transferred. So we want to fill those ones in. Let's just go and see and where we fetch those amounts from. Yeah, so this here is 1,000 liters from the opening work in progress, right? And then during the month completed and transferred, it's 5250. So that's where we are getting those amounts from. Right? So you quickly put those two amounts there, one at the top and the other right at the bottom. So what comes here now, you can see from the calculation is the difference between those two amounts. It's the balancing figure, right? So which is what we basically have from the current production. So which is what contributed to the finish. So this basically means at the end of the day, this is what we finished. This is what we produced, right? But in our production, because we are using the first in, first out method, we want to first exhaust the opening work in progress and then the difference we get from our current units, right? So this is what there is referred to as the current production. So that comes as the balancing figure. Then I already explained now that in terms of equivalent units here, so our portion, this is our portion for equivalent units. So in terms of equivalent units here, we don't take the opening work in progress for direct materials. Why so? Because this material we bought last month. In this instance, we bought that during the last period, so we can't include it in our cost for this month, right? Because our whole intention here at the end of the day is to come up with the costs with the current production, what we are going to include as our costs of current production, right? So this we did last year, right? So what I want to correct is here, right? It's on this portion here. So our opening work in progress is at 70%. So which means 70% to completion, right? So which means they have worked through this thing last month up to 70%. So which means what we need to incorporate this particular month is only 30%. So the mistake there was on the 70%. So we come and make the adjustment there and we put that at 30%. So which means the cost that we are going to incur this year is in terms of our production in completing this thing, because it was 70% completion, so we only left 30%. So we're only going to put in 30% there. So remember, the equivalent units are always going to be that 1,000 there times 30%, right? That's going to be the equivalent units there. All right, so having corrected that, so in terms of current production now, this is completed, so hence that's going to be on 100% because we've completed there, it's completed, right? And then with the material again, with those liters, they are also always going to be complete, right? And then the one other thing, because I think the explanation that I did give last week was that equivalent units are included, right? Equivalent, sorry, not equivalent units, the normal loss in terms of units has to be included in our calculations, right? It has to be included in our calculations. So by leaving that blank, I've actually excluded it inadvertently. So we need to include that there. All right. So
I'm sorry to interrupt, sir.
Yes, please.
I'm still lost on the opening whip for 30%.
On that one for 30%. All right. So
Yes.
as per the question, our opening work in progress for the sauce mixture is 70% complete. So which means we are dealing with the costs that are being incurred, right? We are dealing with the costs that are being incurred in terms of our production. So which means this is the month of September. So which means we bought some material in what comes before September, August. We bought some material in August and we started working on that material. So at the end of the August month, we were on 70% completion. That's clear so far, right? So because now we are dealing with this month, we only need to incorporate the expense that we are going to incur on the production of that tomato sauce, right? So which means because it has been 70% complete, it means that we only need to produce an extra 30% for it to be completed. Is that clear now? Was it Laura who was asking? Or is there anyone else who wants to offer an explanation after I repeat myself? So I was saying here, opening work in progress, it means we bought these things last year, and last month, and we started working on the production of this tomato sauce from last month. So at the end of last month, it was 70% to completion. So we're only
yes, it was missing.
Yes. Then what's left is only 30%, which we're going to do this month. So which is why we're only putting in the 30% there. All right, so let's push that again. So which means we worked on this 30% up until it was finished right there, completed and transferred. All right, so how did we calculate the normal loss? So in terms of our normal loss, let me put it down again there because we had deleted and put some adjustments there last time. So in terms of our normal loss, since we said all units are going to go through the normal loss, right? They are going sorry about that. I actually got interrupted, when you've got babies around. Okay, so we're still dealing with the normal loss here, right? We're still dealing with normal loss. So I was saying, in terms of the initial explanation now that I gave, I said you want to look at which units are included in the normal loss. So in this instance, we concluded that both the opening work in progress, which are the two that you look at basically, the opening work in progress and the closing work in progress, by looking at the respective percentages, you want to see if they've gone through that normal loss. So we concluded that both of them did so, which means we are basically taking the total of the units that we put in, which is 6,000. Then you're multiplying by, you're told that the normal loss has to be 5%. So how did I write this now? Right. Now it has to be 5%. So times 0.05. So that's what we are basically doing there. So I believe that's what we applied there. Yes. 6,000 times 0.05. Then which means in total, our units need to be 6,000 after incorporating the normal loss. And we said sources of normal loss could range from anything which includes, things that could include evaporation and what have you. The normal wastage that we encounter in any production process, spillages, evaporation, etc. So which means at the end of the day, after we've incorporated that, this always has to add up to 6,000 because that's what we put into the production process. So if there's any if there's any discrepancy there, then it has to fall under an abnormal loss, which can either be an abnormal loss or an abnormal profit. So an abnormal loss would be a negative. It means for some reason our liters would have gone over what we expected. So that would become an abnormal gain or abnormal, we normally want to call it an abnormal gain there. All right, and then in terms of units, this is always going to be the same because this needs to be incorporated here. So this is going to be the same there as 300, the same amount. So that's what we lost there. Then in terms of units, again, that's always 100% because it's material. Material is always 100% material, whether you're losing it or gaining it, it's 100%. But the issue now comes in when it comes to the equivalent units there. So it's going to be 80% right there. So it occurs at 80% point, and then this is going to be 80% times 300. Right? So we have rectified that there. So now we are slightly getting different amounts there. So we want to see now where we make use of these equivalent units, right? In our next calculation, we want to see now where we actually make use of these. So we'll go back to the question and then deal with the question that follows. So we were on what part? So we were calculating, right? We were calculating equivalent. So the equivalent cost per unit, right? So what we've done first in answering D, you need the quantity statement. So what we've done is the quantity statement. Now we want to incorporate the cost, right? We want to incorporate the cost. So we've got two kinds of costs here that we want to deal with, right? Two kinds of costs that we want to deal with. So the first one is going to be our conversion costs, right? We want to deal with our conversion costs, and then we also want to deal with our cost of materials, which is direct materials, those two. So at the end of the day, we want the cost per unit, so direct material cost per unit. Then we also want to have the conversion cost per unit. So conversion cost is the cost that we incur in converting those direct materials into finished products. So which is going to include your direct labor, all those costs in that process, direct labor, your machine hours, etc. That's what we want to calculate now. So bearing in mind that we are using the first in, first out. So let's break it down this way. So we will have on our statements now. All right, we want to have, let's say, we'll carry on from here. We have direct material on this side, and then we've got conversion on this side. Okay, so let's stick to that. And then we are going to want opening work in progress. Right, we're going to want opening WIP there, and then we want from the current production. Let's write it like this. All right. So because we are dealing with the first in, first out, because we are dealing with the first in, first out, we are going to ignore the opening work in progress information because we are dealing with the first in, first out. Why are we ignoring it? Because that was incurred in the previous period. Hence, we are going to ignore it. All right, so 8,000 of the opening work in progress relates to conversion cost, and then the balance therefore relates to direct material cost. So we don't really need that in this current period, so we leave that out. All right, and then now let's deal with for the current period. So raw materials put into the production in the current period is worth 62,050, and then the conversion cost for the current period is going to be 59,820. So we are dealing with what is incurred in this current period, not what we've incurred for the last period. So in terms of raw materials, again, remember, we are saying raw materials that are opening work in progress were bought in the last period, so we can't incorporate them now, right? We basically don't want to deal with those then, right? And then conversion costs, these are for the current period, so we are incorporating those there. All right, so the raw materials put in 62 and 50, so let's fill that in there. Raw materials put in there is 62 and 50, right? 62 and 50. So I'm putting that in a bracket because there's an adjustment that we need to make to that amount, which we only make where we say all lost liters are sold at a scrap at 1 rand per liter, right? All lost liters are sold at a scrap at 1 rand per liter. So if you remember, similar to what we were doing when we were dealing with joint costs, you want to offset these on the total cost. You want to offset that there on the total cost. So whatever we've lost now, we basically want to offset the amount from the total cost. So we're going to look at the liters that we lost, and then multiply it by 1 rand, then we'll get the amount there. So why is this being put on the liters? This is being put on the liters because liters is the one that we are selling. But we are selling material. We are not selling conversion costs. We are selling material. So 300 times 1 is a matter of principle. We put it like that. All right. So this is what we get there on direct material. So I shouldn't close that there so that we can put in for conversion. Right. So this is 62 and 50 minus 300. So this is what we have there. And then in terms of conversion costs, our conversion costs are 59,820. So we take our conversion costs 59,820 and we put them right there, 59,820. So those ones don't change. We keep them as they are. All right. And then, okay, this is fine. So this is simply showing the working for that. So that's how you deal with a situation where lost units are being sold. So maybe you want to ask the question why I'm not incorporating the abnormal loss, this 50 here. So this 50, because it's abnormal, it's not incorporated or planned for. This one goes straight as a period cost. Like it goes as a period cost or a period gain or whatsoever. Right? It does not go into our valuation of event. So remember, we use this information for decision making mostly in management accounting. So you don't want to come up with wrong costs that can affect your decisions. For instance, if you incorporate this here, your costs are going to be lessened over a non-recurrent event. You don't want that. The reason why we put in normal losses because we expect this to recur over and over again. So that's why we include them. It will make sense to have them so that when we make decisions, we are aware of that we are going to incur these normal losses. But if it's abnormal, probably they are just spikes, right? It's just spikes. It's probably something that's not going to come again. So we don't include that there. Right. So on opening here, because it's first in, first out, we don't deal with that there. We don't deal with opening work in progress. All right. So, okay. So maybe we can total this up as a matter of principle again, but we all know what the totals are. Okay, so the equivalent cost per unit now, let's just say cost per unit, or right, equivalent cost per unit is basically going to be, so 65750, this one here, which is, it costs 65750 divided by 5,000, which is the equivalent units that we got there for our material. And then for the other one, it's going to be 59820 divided by the top amount here, which is 5190, right? Divided by 5190. All right, also let me close this here. Then we can do the math there. $12.35, and the that there is, all right, $11.53 as the equivalent cost. All right, so this is on the first in, first out. But what happens now if we are dealing with the weighted method, right? When we're dealing with the weighted method. So let me copy this into another sheet. So I'm gonna go, let's see what we had copied here last time. Okay, something totally different. So I'm just gonna copy this into another sheet so that we keep this information, and then we run a calculation now on the weighted average method. Right, so this is what we have there. So suppose the question wanted us to use the weighted average method. So one thing about the weighted average method is it does not draw a distinction, for starters. It does not draw a distinction between the opening work in progress and the closing work in progress. So you basically start off from your completed and transferred there. So you don't have these, you don't have these two rows here. You basically delete them. So your completed and transferred remains the same, right? Because that's what we completed and transferred. So this remains the same. Then in terms of units, it remains the same. And then it also, in terms of conversion, it also remains the same. All right, so let's take these out. Right, so here we have that there, right? And then it's going to be 100%. Then here you still have the same thing, right? And it's also 100%. So that's what you have there on that. So you can already see the difference, the adjustments that on. So, right, in terms of your normal loss, notice that your normal loss is still the same. Right, your normal loss is still the same. Right there, everything is still the same. Your abnormal loss is still the same. So the major difference comes on your conversion costs, what you include on your conversion costs there, and then again what you've included on your direct materials. So in terms of our direct materials, because we have not made a distinction between the opening and what was put in, we basically put all those together, right? We treated them as one thing because it's a weighted average method. That's why we have a slightly bigger amount there. Because unlike first in, first out, here we've included opening work in progress, despite the fact that we bought that last month. Right, and then same as the conversion costs, we're basically treating it as one thing there. All right, then you add up the totals the same way. So the only difference is there. Right? That's where the only difference is on the quantity statement, the top part. Then you basically add up the amounts, the totals the same way that you did for the first in, first out. Normal loss calculations still just the same. But now our work in progress needs to be included, right? Because we have work in progress put in there. So it makes sense for us to put in work in progress amounts there, right? So that's what we are going to do. So we'll fetch those amounts from the question. So the difference is, while for the first in, first out, we never included work in progress because it was incorporated last time. Here we actually incorporate it. We actually make use of it because we are weighting this. We are saying the cost needs to be weighted. The cost basically has to be the same. So this is where this issue comes in now. 8,000 of opening work in progress relates to conversion cost and the balance to direct material. So you come here and you check 18,000, so which means 10,000 and 8,000. So 8,000 relates to conversion costs. So we go there to our conversion costs, right? It's 8,000, so you put in 8,000 there, and then here it's going to be 10,000, the balance, right? So you see, these have slightly changed there as a result of the method that we're using. So you'd also come and make a correction here to check the figures as you see them there. So that's going to be 7,1 at 750, and then there it's basically 6,7,820, right? 6,7,820. So that's what you basically have there. So you would have finished your calculation, right? I don't know if we have any questions on this. If we have any quick questions on this one here. All right, so perfectly clear. So just re-go through the recording so you can mix up last week's recording and this week's recording, taking note of the corrections that were made there, particularly in relation to the opening work in progress and the loss, right, and the loss. All right, so as an introduction, next time we are going on our next meeting, we are going to be, which is most likely going to be maybe on Monday. We are not having anything this weekend. Most likely on Monday, we are going to be dealing with part C, calculate the budgeted optimal allocation and available raw tomatoes in kilograms per product type, right, for the month ending 30 September 2029. So what I'll need you to do now in preparation for the class, the information that you need is all here. The information that you need is all here. So I'll need you to calculate the contribution, right? Contribution per unit and then per product. And then from there, contribution per limiting factor. So for the limiting factor, we are already told it's the tomatoes. So you come and fetch the information about the tomatoes here on 2.12. Then you find out how much quantities of tomatoes are needed for sauce and juice, right, respectively, and then you divide, you get your contribution per limiting factor, and then you look for the highest and then decide which one you're going to give first preference in your manufacturing. That's what we're going to be doing on our next session.